We are totally dependent on international circumstances, economic and geopolitical circumstances. Our fuel mostly comes from Singapore, South Korea, Saudi Arabia and beyond. There's now a cartel, as you know, known as OPEC, which holds sway with supply. It was originally just a group of 5 oil-rich nations: Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. The OPEC countries, they were called. They collaborated to basically seize and control the production, and that meant control of price. But by 1975, OPEC expanded to 13 nations, including Nigeria and Algeria. And then in 2016, it was joined by more oil-producing nations, including the world's 3rd biggest oil extractor, Russia. OPEC has little hesitation in manipulating supply. They're able to operate as a cartel, exercising a monopoly power to impact the price of oil on global markets, and as a consequence, when the oil is refined, the price of petrol. Indeed, they boast, "We don't want people to try to predict what we will do." So here we are in Australia. 90% of our consumption, petrol and diesel, comes from overseas. We are vulnerable to any international crisis that might affect us directly or indirectly. In the end, we're an island. Everything has to come by sea. So block off sea access and we're in trouble. We do have our own limited oil reserves and 2 refineries, Viva Energy in Victoria and Ampol's Lytton plant in Brisbane. But 90% of our fuel is imported, refined in Singapore. We're also impacted by the strength of the US dollar. The US dollar matters because oil trades are made in US dollars. And the Australian dollar is currently, about 64 cents to the dollar, but it's forecast to go down. Singapore matters because it is our dominant regional supplier via 3 major refineries, including one of the largest plants in the world, owned by the multinational giant ExxonMobil. Singapore imports all of its crude and then it refines it. 2/3 of the crude comes from the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. But Singapore also controls supply to us. Have a look at this picture here. Have a look at this picture. There you are on your screen, oil tankers, look at them. Those things in orange and yellow oil tankers queued up in the waters of Singapore. Now, if you unloaded them, refined the oil and got it to us, petrol prices fall. But Singapore enjoys its monopoly. We pay. So don't blame the service stations. They're not hiking up the price just because motorists are on the road at a long weekend. It is a common misconception that service stations collude when to put up prices. There are 8,025 service stations in Australia, managed by about 3,500 different businesses, mostly small. Individual service station proprietors are poor buggers just making the decision how to survive. Margin in regular unleaded fuel is wafer thin. More than half the pump price is taken up with production costs. Another 31% of the pump price is government taxes. 11% of the price is industry operating costs and margins. So the service station averages a return of about 2.8 cents a litre on regular unleaded fuel. And of course, the government would argue that petrol sales will drop, so the price will drop, depending on how fast the electric vehicle transition happens. We're living in la-la land. Will electric vehicles replace petrol-driven cars? Pull the other leg. It plays Nat King Cole. And even then, what is the risk analysis I've been telling you in relation to electric vehicles? But for now, don't blame the service stations. As the Energy Minister of Saudi Arabia said only in June, announcing Saudi oil production would be cut, we always want to add suspense. We don't want people to try to predict what we do. How critical is our vulnerability when 90% of our oil consumption, petrol and diesel, comes from overseas? We are vulnerable. From where I sit, the Albanese government is doing nothing to address that vulnerability.